Welcome to the video. In this video we're going to take our first look at this little model here in my hands. This is a Walkera Runner 250 and this is a 250 quad that, unlike the others that we've been looking at on the channel, comes pre-built ready to fly. I'd like to say a big thank you before we get into the detail to Banggood.com for sending me this to have a play with, and I'll put the link in the description underneath. They also sell all of the spares that you're going to need when you start flying this, because you will need some. It's a 250 quad, it's designed to be thrown around. I'll put links to those in the description as well. But thanks to those guys for sending this along, because this is something that I've been interested in, because for me, I've had a couple of people come along in the subscriber comments, but also a couple of friends who love the idea of 250 quads, but are not confident enough to put one together. And this is an option for those pilots who love to fly, but don't get such a big kick out of spending time with Arduino programming and a soldering iron. What I'm going to do is, in this video, talk about the actual craft itself. We'll have a look at it. I've been flying mine around. You can see it's already bearing a couple of little scars and a couple of little nicks in the blades and things from my flying around with it. So I want to talk about that. Also talk about some of the features and some of the stuff that I think you just need to be a little careful of with it when you get it. And then finally what we're going to do is spend a little bit of time talking about how you convert this to run with your own radio system. There are two versions of this model available, and there are lots of then different subversions of those main two ones. You can either get it with something called a Devo 7 radio, where it actually comes pre-installed with a Devo receiver that fits into that space at the back where we currently have an orange receiver, and that then is literally everything you need in the box. It's the receiver, it's the model, the battery comes with it as well, and you can take it out, charge the battery, and you're ready to fly. I would recommend, though, if you've never ever flown a quad before, is that rather than start with something like this, absolutely have this ready for when you get proficient, but I'd start with a little small quad, something like a Hubsan X4, just to get the hang of how these things behave. Because this behaves very much like a small mini quad like a Hubsan X4, but obviously it's a lot bigger and things break a lot faster. It's a 250 quad, so it's designed to be abused, but it'll only take so much abuse before things will start to break. So in the second half of the video we are going to spend a lot of time talking about how I've actually done the conversion, because this one that I've got from Banggood is actually one that came without a radio, because I've already got enough computer radios, I don't need another one. So if you're a pilot that already has a computer radio, something like a Walkera Devo 7, if you already have something like a Spektrum or a Taranis or one of those classes of radio, then you can very easily convert this with a receiver of your choice to fly with your existing kit. And that's what we'll do in the second half of the video. I've had to figure that out because the instructions and the manuals and stuff haven't been great for that. So the first thing we'll do is talk about the actual model itself. What do I think? Well, actually, I really like it. I think it's a nice way to start out. And I know that there are a couple of my friends that when I show them this model will absolutely be wanting to get one. Comes pre-built. This is how it comes out of the box. So the only thing I've done is installed the props, and they just lock on themselves. They're kind of self-tightening props, so you don't really have to have a tool to take them on or off. In addition to the model itself and the props that you just screw on, then you get a 220 milliamp hour battery, so you can fly the thing. That is the little aerial holder that goes on the top that was there to support the original Devo 7 radio. Obviously I've taken those two bits off because we're not going to use that in this build. Also comes with one of the little cheap and cheerful Walkera chargers for the LiPo battery, but I'd expect that if you're a pilot that would want to do the radio conversion, you're already a pilot that has a battery charger. So let's look at what's good on the model. It does have everything you need. So it has a little 700 TVL line camera that's actually not a bad quality at all. It's mounted on a tilt, so depending on how you want to fly it, you can have it looking slightly up if you're always flying slightly nose down, which is usually how a 250 quad flies. There is the video transmitter on the top, complete with a circular polarized antenna pre-installed. Then it has its own proprietary flight controller in the middle. Feels very much to me like a CC3D with OpenPilot. It's a very nice controlled dialed in experience. Then behind it is where we originally had our Devo 7 receiver, and I've replaced that, and we'll have a look at that in a sec. And then at the back we have our XT60 connector that's actually part of the frame, which makes it lovely to pop the battery underneath in the tray, and then you can plug the cable straight in the back. It's red lights at the back and it's lovely white lights at the front. The red lights at the back also act as the arming indicator, so they flash and show you when it's initializing, then they're on solid when it's armed and ready to fly. So it's a nice visual indicator that you're ready to go. The carbon fibre itself is a decent quality. We have nice 3mm arms, and the other plates are about millimetre, so they're not particularly thick, but the main structural components are things like these legs, which are quite big and sturdy and plastic. The main brain is all done through this power distribution board, which I'm not sure if you can see here, but everything plugs into it. So it's really nice for those builders who don't want to spend time with a soldering iron. All of the components like the ESC are plug and play, they snap into connectors, and all the motors come with the bullets pre-installed, so it's a piece of cake if you want to replace any of the components. But it does mean that all of the signals like the video, the control signals and everything else on the default model all pass through the power distribution board. The thing that I'm not overly enamored with is the way it's built, is that these front arms and the back arms are actually one piece of carbon, and that potentially is going to be interesting. If we snap one of the arms, we then have to replace the entire thing and take pretty much the whole front assembly off to replace the particular piece that we've busted. That's doable, but I think it would have been lovely if when you broke an arm you just did the 3 or 4 bolts that held it on and replaced that piece, rather than have to take the whole front or back of the craft apart, because you will break arms. And that's the other thing that I would say with this. It only comes with one set of blades in the pack. You're absolutely going to need more than those. I was lucky I managed to avoid smashing this before I had to do the review, while I was test flying it and making sure the radio was set up properly. But I would say get yourself an additional set of these props. So rather than have to build one and spend time watching something like the Naze 32 or the CC3D series on the channel, you can buy a model that comes with everything you need for an FPV 250 racer, and it's quite nice. It actually hovers about 42% throttle, and the battery will give you easily 10 to 12 minutes of flight time. The motors themselves are really nice, these little low profile pancake style motors. It says a 21 kV, and they're spinning decent sized props as well, so it feels lovely and it's very stable. Last thing I'll point out then before we get onto the radio is there is a little anti-vibration mount here on the top, so if you want to pop something like a Mobius or a run cam or something else on top to record your flight in glorious HD, it's absolutely all there. The only other thing that we haven't got on this model that we'll do in a later one is under here in the frame there is space to install an OSD, an on-screen display module that just snaps in with a couple of row of pins, and that is something that I'm going to get my hands on, and we'll do a separate video about the FPV capabilities of this craft so that we can look at it working with things like Fat Shark goggles and other things. But I won't have time to do that in this video, and I'll wait till I've got the on-screen display module before we play with that in detail. So let's go and have a look at what we need to do if we want to replace the Devo 7 radio that came here as part of the kit with a receiver of our choice. First thing we need to be aware of is that the receiver itself actually plugs into the board using a ribbon cable. So as I've said, that PCB that's at the top actually connects to everything with cute little ribbon cables, including the flight controller. That makes for a really clean installation. However, if you want to plug in your own controller, then there's actually a little port here underneath, wait for the camera to catch up, there we go, that has servo style connections that you can plug everything into. The thing is, you have to be really careful, because although looking at this it looks like it's giving you 5 channels, throttle, aileron, elevator, rudder and a gear switch to control whether or not it's auto, level or rate mode, it looks like you just plug them in, but you don't. So let's have a look at the manual and talk about exactly what we need to do to start plugging this together. So just before we jump into a couple of slides, just to explain how we've all put it together, let me kind of show you it on the craft itself. So here we are looking at the side. Here's the receiver that we've replaced at the back that was originally where the Devo 7 receiver was installed in the craft. You could obviously put your receiver anywhere you wanted. Just for me, I like the idea of using that space. I wanted to take the Devo 7 receiver off anyway. I don't want that powered up and confusing anything on the craft, so I've taken it off. To take it off is really straightforward. It's just held on with a little bit of sticky tape. If you pry that up, then you can push on the little black tabs and the ribbon cable will come free. Once that's removed, that creates a nice little void that you can pop your own receiver into, and it's just a case of screwing the top plate back down. Once you have your receiver installed, then you can run some cables along the side here. There's even a couple of holes that you can put some cable ties in and then install it all into that funky port. So let's have a look at a couple of diagrams and just explain how that port works, because the manual itself, although it actually shows you the port, and this is quite a nice little manual, but it's really useful if you have the version that comes with a radio. It goes through all of the settings and all the other pieces, but it doesn't really go into any detail of how you configure it for use with another radio system, which is why I'm covering it here. So this is the port diagram. So I'm going to use exactly the same diagram in a couple of slides and explain how you connect your receiver to this port so you can use it with your own radio. So here's the first diagram. Here's that receiver connector that's underneath the craft at the bottom right hand side, and we have our little receiver on the left hand side. You'll notice that although it looks like, particularly with the way that the graphics are screen printed on the PCB itself on the Walkera, it looks like you're going to plug in the elevator, aileron, throttle, rudder and gear channels just into each of those side by side, particularly if you look at the graphic very quickly and notice that one row of pins are all ground pins. Looks like you're just going to plug in 5 cables from the elevator, aileron, throttle, rudder and gear from your receiver into there, and you're good to go. Until you spot that the middle pins are actually used for other things. So you can see that although the first middle pin on the left hand side is 5 volts, the other pins are used for signals for auxiliaries 1, 2 and 3. So you can't just install 5 cables. What you need to do is, first of all, plug your first cable in that's going to go to your elevator that has all 3 servo wires, that's going to connect a ground connection, a plus 5 volts so it can power your receiver, and also will then give you a wire to plug into the elevator channel on your receiver. Next thing you need to do, or the way that I did it, which worked quite nicely, was take another servo cable, plug them into the 3 pins for the aileron, throttle and rudder, and that then gave me another output, and that cable then I actually split into 3 ends and plugged them into the individual signal pins for aileron, throttle and rudder. And then the last thing I did, I used a separate single cable that plugged into that gear channel, and that gear channel is the one that selects whether or not it's auto level or acro mode on the model itself. So if we go back and have a look at that now, you can see here on the actual receiver itself we have one cable which has all of the 3 wires, which is providing the power. Then we have another 3-pin cable that's going across those connections, and finally there's my little auxiliary gear cable, the single one, there's just one wire that's giving me that connection. So if you connect it up in that way, then you should be good to go. Next thing you need to do, of course, then is create a model on the radio that's going to fly the Walkera and work properly. So here's the model that I'm using with the Walkera Runner 250 right now, and it's working beautifully. So what I want to do is show you how each of the channel values move in relation to the sticks for the elevator, aileron, throttle and rudder, and also for the little switch up here in the top left hand corner that I'm using to switch between the 2 flight modes. And that's the channel that's connected to the gear pin on the input of the Walkera Runner. So if I just jump into the monitor screen, if I increase the throttle, which is the top bar here, you'll see that it goes from a low channel value up to a high channel value, and that's what you want. So low throttle value at the bottom, high at the top. That's exactly what you'd expect. And similarly with the elevator, which is the 3rd bar down, at the bottom you want it to have a low channel value and then go to a high channel value as you push the stick up. The interesting thing is with the rudder and the aileron, you both work the same way. In their right hand positions, you want the channel value to be low. So look at the rudder value here, it's the fourth one down, and then as I take it over to the left, it increases. Similarly with the aileron, it starts low on the right hand side, and you can see it's the second one down here on the screen, and as I take it over to the left hand side, it increases. Last thing then is the gear switch, which is actually I've got it installed where it says pitch here, it's auxiliary 1 on my receiver, but in the low value it says auto level, in the high value it gives you rate mode on the model. So let's very quickly look at that in a couple of diagrams. First of all, the way I've designed this is that the arrow's pointing in the direction where the head of the arrow is where the higher value of the channel needs to be, towards the 2000 microsecond values at where the head of the arrow is, and where the tail of the arrow is, that needs to be around the 1000 second values. So it just gives you an idea visually of what we've just had a look at. So again, throttle is exactly as you'd expect. Low throttle is a low channel value, high throttle is a high channel value. Elevator works in exactly the same way. When the elevator's at the bottom, it is a low channel value. When the elevator's at the top, it's a high channel value. And then rudder works slightly weirdly in that the rudder in the right hand side is a low channel value, left hand side is a high channel value, and similarly with aileron, that's the same as well. What I'd recommend is when you're setting this up and you're going out to do your test flight, just hover and just double check, particularly with the aileron and elevator, that they are corresponding and working in the right way. There's a very easy way to check whether or not the throttle and the rudder is working fine, and that is how you arm and disarm the craft. So we'll do that next just to test it, and if it doesn't work the right way round on the rudder, you know that your rudder's probably the wrong way round. So let's get the craft back on the table by the side of the radio, and let me show you what those red lights at the back do when you power it up and then when you arm it. And then once we've done that, we'll put some footage of us out at the field flying this thing about, and I'll give you my final thoughts. So to power on any quadcopter is very similar to any remote control model. Good practice is always to power the radio on first. Make sure that you are ready. If you have a timer, make sure that the timer's set and all ready to go. Next thing to do then is to plug in the model. Now as I plug it in, what you'll notice is these red lights at the back will flash to indicate that it's initializing. Once it's initialized and ready, then the lights will go out to show it's disarmed. So let's just plug it in. So there's it initializing. And now it's ready. Now, to arm the craft is very straightforward. What you do is you just hold the throttle rudder to the lowest left-hand position, and the craft is armed, and then we can start the motors. To disarm it, you hold the control in the bottom right position, and it disarms it. And the red lights at the back are giving you a very nice clear indicator that you are ready to fly. So again, armed, disarmed. And now you can see with this one, with it all disarmed, is we have those lovely white lights at the front, and when we're ready to fly, we have the red lights at the back. Be careful, a couple of times I've initialized this, I've actually had a little bit of a problem where when it started, it's wanted to tip over a little bit. So as soon as I was trying to take off, it's wanted to tip one way or the other. All I've done in those cases is just unplugged it, counted to 10, plugged it back in, and it's reinitialized fine. Occasionally with all flight controllers, you might get a little bit of a hiccup in that it doesn't boot cleanly, or one of the gyroscopes or accelerometers hasn't initialized properly, and in that case it can do a couple of weird things. If you notice that as you're trying to take off it's trying to tip, or when you start the motors they're trying to speed up automatically without you asking them to, just turn it off, power it off, unplug the wire, and then count to 10, plug it back in, it'll be fine. Right, okay, I think we've delayed it long enough. Let's put some video of this flying around the field, and then I'll let you know what I think. So we're armed and we're about to take off, and you'll notice the two cameras here that we're actually capturing this little test flight with. One is a ground station camera, so thank you to my wife for providing the camera support for that, and second is an onboard HD camera. This time we're using a RunCam HD, and that's why the colour saturation is slightly different. Both of the cameras are performing a little bit differently in the lights conditions. A little bit of a light breeze while we're doing this test flight, but it isn't really affecting the craft at all. Flying around, it feels really stable and level. I've put a little bit of exponential onto the radio for elevator and aileron, pretty much left the rudder alone. Set the throttle point, it's hovering for me at about 42% throttle, so I flatten the throttle around the 42% area in the middle of the throttle curve just to give me nice fine control, and it's providing a really nice flight. Feels to me like a CC3D with OpenPilot or with a tuned down NAS A32. And the two modes that you get on the craft give very different feelings. We're flying at the moment in the self-level mode, which is the default, the low value for that gear channel that we had to look at before. Doesn't allow you to tilt over, must be about 40-45 degrees in any orientation, and as soon as you let go of the sticks it snaps back up to be self-level, so it's a great one to learn and try out on. So in summary, I would say this is a great model. If you're looking to get your hands on one of these, then if you don't have a radio, buy one with the Devo 7. That will give you everything you need in the package to get going. But now you know, if you have an existing radio and you're already an RC pilot, but you don't fancy the rigmarole of trying to build, configure, tune, program your own 250 class quad, this is a fantastic option where you get it out the box, and following the instructions in this video, you can add your own receiver and be flying in no time at all. Do remember to order the spares though. The spares, particularly around the props, the lack of those in the box I think is a bit of an oversight, so make sure that you're at least ordering one full set of props, because something this fun is going to get damaged. So thanks again to Banggood.com for sending me this to have a look at. Really appreciate it. It's been great fun, and it's also fun to kind of compare and contrast flying this with some of my custom built 250 class quads that are also on the channel. So the videos, links to those, I'll also put in the description if you're interested. And finally, I'd just like to say, if this is going to be your first quad, just think about getting something like a Hubsan X4 just to practice on, because the crashes are a lot cheaper. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video. There are lots of other videos on the channel, and they're carefully ordered into playlists, so you may find that there are other videos on this same subject that you can go and watch. So I would recommend going into the playlist area of Painless 360 YouTube channel and looking around and seeing what there is. You never know what you might find. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and happy flying.